You're one of maybe 2,000 humans left on the entire planet. Predators outnumber you 100 to 1. Cave lions bigger than modern tigers. Hyenas that could crack bone like twigs. Scientists estimate humanity nearly went extinct more than once, hunted to the edge by animals stronger than anything alive today. Here's the thing nobody tells you. The numbers alone should have finished us. They almost did. Picture where you're actually standing. Not a stage, not a screen. A stretch of dry grass under a sky about to go black, somewhere in what's now East Africa more than 1,000,000 years before anyone writes anything down. No rifle, no locked door, maybe a sharpened stick if you're lucky. A handful of people you trust, and somewhere past the tree line, eyes that already know exactly where you are because they've been watching you since before the sun went down. That's not a metaphor, that's a Tuesday. Every predator sharing this landscape outclasses you on paper, not slightly, completely. And that's not exaggeration for effect. It's the literal, measured fossil record truth. Start with the cave lion, not some scrawny footnote to the modern line, a genuinely bigger animal. Fossil skeletons put the largest males close to 800 pounds, some estimates running 15 to 25% heavier than the biggest lions alive today, squarely in the same weight class as the largest tigers that have ever existed. Now add the hyenas. Forget the scavenger stereotype. Ice Age spotted hyenas hunted in coordinated clans, followed prey for days at a time, and carried jaws engineered to open a leg bone the way you'd snap a breadstick. Now add cave bears, built like a grizzly that skipped leg day and never stopped growing. Now add leopards, which don't even bother waiting in the open, they wait above you in the branches, on the exact path you walk every single day to get water. And that's before you even count the scimitar-toothed cats working the daylight hours. Built for open plains sprinting, which means the one window you thought was safe, broad daylight, out in the open, away from the caves, was never actually safe at all. Back at the edge of your fire, none of this feels like trivia. It feels like a held breath. Every rustle in the grass is a decision: run, freeze, or reach for the stick. And you have to make that decision correctly, every time, in your entire life, without a single mistake, because the predators only need to be right once. On paper, you lose. Every time, in every matchup, against every single one of them. But here's the problem with on paper. Paper isn't where this story actually lives. It lives in the bone record. Actual skulls, actual fossils, pulled out of actual caves with the puncture marks still sitting there 2 million years later, waiting for somebody to notice what made them. Take the skull of a 3-year-old, discovered in a limestone quarry in 1924. The species doesn't even carry a name you'd recognize: Australopithecus, one of the very first upright walking hominins on the family tree, dated to nearly 2 million years old. For decades, the working theory was a leopard. Reasonable guess, given everything else on that list. Then researchers actually laid the skull next to modern monkey skulls recovered from the nests of African crowned eagles, birds that today still kill primates by driving their talons straight through the eye socket and skull. The marks lined up, puncture for puncture, scratch for scratch. That child wasn't stalked through the grass, it was carried into the sky. Sit with that for 1 second. Not chased, not cornered, airlifted. And the ground wasn't any safer. 500,000 years later, a few thousand miles north, in a cave in Morocco, archaeologists uncovered the remains of another hominin ancestor, mixed directly into a hyena den. No stone tools nearby, no sign anyone controlled that space, just bone processed the exact same way hyenas process everything else that wanders in. Cracked, hollowed, gone. Then there's Swartkrans in South Africa, where a young hominin skull turned up with 2 clean, round punctures in the back of the head, a near-perfect match for the lower canines of a fossil leopard jaw found in the very same layer of rock. For 50 years, that skull was the textbook proof of an entire theory scientists called the hunted. Proof that our early relatives weren't just occasionally unlucky, they were, in the most literal sense, prey. And it isn't only the early small-brained cousins on the family tree. Fast forward past 1 million years of evolution, well into the era of Neanderthals. Bigger brains, better tools, real hunting technique, and researchers studying their skeletons found something strange. Healed fractures on the skull, the ribs, the arms, clustered in a pattern doctors recognize instantly because it shows up in one very specific group of modern humans, professional rodeo riders. The kind of trauma you get from repeated, close-range collisions with something large, strong, and actively trying to hurt you. Not falls, not accidents. Recurring, survivable, close-quarters violence with big animals over and over for an entire adult life. Whatever these people were doing to eat and to avoid becoming someone else's meal, they were doing it close enough to get hurt badly on a fairly routine basis. 3 separate lines of evidence. 3 separate species on the family tree. One eaten by a bird of prey 2 million years ago. One killed by a leopard's exact bite radius.
A third generation walking around with the skeletal signature of a rodeo career, just from staying alive. The pattern doesn't budge. But here's where it gets interesting. That short-crunched skull, the leopard one, the fossil that anchored an entire framework about who got eaten and why, for half a century everybody assumed it belonged to Paranthropus, the heavy-jawed, small-brained cousin on our family tree, the one without our supposedly bigger brain, our clever hands, our edge. The story practically told itself. The slow ones, the dumb ones got picked off.
The our line, the tool makers, got away. Except a 2024 reanalysis of that exact skull found it wasn't Paranthropus, it was Homo, one of us. One of the tool users, the fire keepers, the branch of family history had already crowned as the winners. Say that again slower. The smart lion got eaten too. Here's the problem with the old story once you actually sit with that. It wasn't just wrong about one skull. It was wrong about the entire shape of the fight. It assumed intelligence was a shield you could carry alone, like a bigger stick or a sharper rock, something that worked whether or not anybody else was around. But a leopard doesn't check your resume before it drops out of a tree. It doesn't care how big your brain is relative to your body mass. It cares whether you're alone, whether you're asleep, and whether anyone is watching your back. On that particular night at Swartkrantz, the answer to all 3 questions was no. That single reclassification quietly wrecked one of paleoanthropology's favorite bedtime stories. The comforting idea that intelligence alone worked like a force field against being somebody's dinner. It doesn't. A bigger brain does nothing to stop a leopard's canine finding the back of your skull while you're asleep and something is silently pushing weight down through the branch above you. Cleverness, on its own, didn't save that individual. So if raw intelligence wasn't the difference maker, what actually was? Here's the honest answer, and it's less cinematic than the movie version. It was never one single advantage. It was a stack of small ones, compounding on top of each other generation after generation until the math finally started to tip. Start with fire. Not fire as some lightning bolt Promethean invention, fire as something even earlier hominins simply refused to let go out. Deep inside Wonderwork Cave in South Africa, more than 30 meters from the entrance, well past any point a wandering wildfire could ever naturally reach, researchers using new bone analysis techniques have now traced burning evidence back as far as 1.79 million years ago, a date confirmed in a study published just this year. That's not somebody striking 2 rocks together for the first time. That's somebody carrying a burning branch into total darkness and keeping it alive night after night in a spot chosen specifically because the things hunting you wouldn't follow past the light. Think of fire less like a tool and more like the world's first alarm system, a boundary no cave lion, however much stronger it was, would willingly walk through. Fire didn't just push back predators either, it bought hours. Before fire, your day basically ended at sunset because moving around in the dark, blind, next to animals with far better night vision than yours was a losing bet. Firelight stretched the usable day into the night. Time to talk, to plan, to teach, to just sit together instead of lying rigid in the dark listening for footsteps. That extra stretch of safe, shared time, repeated for hundreds of thousands of nights, is not a small thing. It's one of the quiet, unglamorous reasons a species that couldn't outrun, outmuscle, or outfight almost anything on the landscape still had enough spare time to figure out everything else on this list. Now add range. A leopard's entire strategy depends on closing distance before you ever know it's there. A spear breaks that strategy completely on contact. At a lakeside site in Germany called Schöningen, archaeologists pulled 9 wooden spears and a set of throwing sticks out of the ancient mud, sanded, seasoned, weighted almost exactly like modern javelins, somewhere between 200,000 and 300,000 years old, depending on which dating method you trust, and researchers are still actively arguing over the exact number. What isn't up for debate is what the spears prove. Multiple people working in coordination, planning a hunt in advance against animals many times their size. Some of those wooden shafts weren't even built for stabbing. They were balanced, weighted, carved to be thrown, the same basic physics you'd find in a modern javelin. That's not a stick you grab in a panic. That's a stick somebody sat down and designed, tested, and taught someone else how to use weeks or months before it ever left anyone's hand. Think about what that actually does to the math. A cave lion's entire advantage is close range, the pounce, the bite, the crushing weight landing before you can react. A spear turns a fight you'd lose alone into a fight a group can actually win on purpose. A spear turns a fight you'd lose alone into a fight a group can actually win on purpose. And underneath both of those, the real advantage, the one no lion or hyena has ever once managed to copy, cooperation. Not just tolerating each other's company, depending on it. Sharing meat so nobody hunts while starving, exhausted, and careless. Teaching a child which sounds mean danger before that child ever has to learn it the hard way, the way the town child did, alone, without warning, looking up at exactly the wrong second. Even the people who couldn't hunt anymore mattered here. Researchers who study hunter-gatherer demographics have long pointed out something odd about humans compared to almost every other species. We're one of the only species where individuals routinely live for decades past the point they can still chase down prey or fend off an attacker. That shouldn't make evolutionary sense, unless those older, slower group members were doing something just as valuable as hunting. Watching children, remembering which waterhole dried up the last time there was a drought like this one, remembering which ridge the lions used last spring. A body that can't fight anymore can still carry 20 years of memory nobody else in the group has, and in a world this hostile, memory was a survival tool in its own right. Natural selection doesn't care about strength or speed viewed in isolation. It behaves like a ruthless optimization algorithm quietly testing every possible combination of traits an animal can offer, and across hundreds of thousands of years, it kept landing on the same answer. Individuals who stayed close, who shared information, who moved and acted as a unit survived at higher rates than the ones who tried to go it alone. Not because any single human could outrun a cave lion, because a dozen humans coordinating made themselves a genuinely worse bet than whatever else was on the menu that particular night. Which brings us back to that number from the very top, 2000. Where does a figure like that even come from? Genetic research published in the journal Science in 2023 modeled the population history of our ancestors using DNA pulled from more than 3,000 living people today, and the results made headlines everywhere they landed. Somewhere between roughly 930,000 and 813,000 years ago, the effective breeding population of our entire lineage may have collapsed to something like 1,280 individuals, and stay that small for close to 117,000 years straight. Nearly 99% of our ancestors gone, according to the model. For scale, that's a number smaller than several species currently sitting on an endangered list right now. And it's close enough to the number we opened with that the comparison isn't a coincidence. Somewhere in that window, for a very long stretch of time, the entire future of everyone who's ever lived ran through a group of people you could fit into a couple of school buses. Now, the honest caveat, because pretending this is more settled than it actually is would be its own kind of lie. Not every scientist buys it. Other researchers have pushed back hard, arguing the signal could be a statistical artifact of the modeling method rather than proof of an actual historical crash. And that debate is still very much unresolved. But even the skeptics agree on the general shape of the era. A genuinely brutal stretch of shifting climate, spreading drought, and vanishing prey stacked directly on top of everything else already trying to eat you. Whether the real number was 1,200 or 12,000, the margin was thin. Thin enough that losing a handful of skilled hunters or surviving a few unlucky winters could plausibly have ended the entire experiment. Go back to the grass for a second. The fires burnt down to embers. Somewhere out there, something is still watching, patient as weather, in no particular hurry, because it's outnumbered you 100 to 1 for as long as anyone can remember, and it knows it. That's the actual weight sitting on that group huddled around that fire. Not a movie monster, a statistical certainty, night after night, that something out there was stronger than any one of them. So how do you actually survive odds like that? You don't survive them individually. Nobody ever did. You survive them as a network. A species-wide bet spread across every fire kept burning through the night, every spear thrown in unison in time to matter. Take away the fire and the lions eventually win. Take away the spears and the hyenas eventually win. Take away the cooperation, the sheer, stubborn refusal to scatter when scattering would have been the easier, more animal instinct, and it doesn't matter how many fires or spears you've got left, because one human with the best weapon in the world is still just a single meal to something bigger, faster, and infinitely more patient. It's the combination that closes the 100 gap. Not raw strength, structure. A system that could learn something once and remember it and pass it to the next set of hands by the fire, which is the one trick no cave lion, no hyena, no leopard waiting silently in a tree has ever once managed to pull off. A cave lion that learns something useful dies with that knowledge sealed inside its own skull, gone forever the moment it stops breathing. A human who learns something turns to the person sitting next to them and says it out loud, and now 2 people know it. Then the whole group knows it, then eventually, everyone descended from that group knows it too. That's you. That's the reason you're hearing any of this at all. So go back to where we actually started. That stretch of dark grass, cooling fast under a sky with no artificial light anywhere in it. Maybe 2,000 of you left on the entire planet, predators outnumbering you 100 to 1. Cave lions bigger than tigers moving somewhere just past what you can see, patient enough to wait all night if they have to. Except now you know what was actually happening out there in the dark. Not luck, not one lone hero with a lucky spear throw. 100 small, unglamorous decisions repeated by ordinary, frightened people, night after night, for hundreds of thousands of consecutive nights. Keep the fire fed. Take your turn on watch. Share what you caught today. Tell the children exactly what killed their cousin so it never gets the chance to kill them too. Every one of those decisions had to work, every single night, for 100,000 nights in a row more or less, back to back, with almost no room for error. It did. Not once in a single dramatic stand, but thousands of times in ordinary moments nobody thought to write down, because nobody survives 100 to 1 fight by being remembered for it. They survived it by making sure there was a next generation left to forget how close it actually was. You were never the exception to those odds. You were the sum of every single night they got beaten, every fire that held, every spear landed a half-second early. The predators are gone now, mostly. The grass is gone too, paved over or fenced off or turned into somewhere you'll never stand. But the fire's still going. It's just smaller now. It's just you reading this sentence in the light of a screen instead of a flame, carrying the same odds their fire once carried out of that dark and into here.